If you're a barrister or a senior lawyer, you probably told yourself at one point, I have to get this right, I can't make any mistakes. Not because you don't know the law or you don't have enough experience, because your name is attached to whatever it is you're about to do. So today I want to show you why that pressure to be perfect isn't protecting you or your reputation the way that you think it is, why it may be costing you even more than you realise. And how can I say that? Because I've lived it. I came into law without even finishing high school. So nothing about that journey from not finishing high school to coming into law and then becoming a barrister, it required me, it didn't happen, it required me to have large amounts of courage. I became a barrister, built my legal career and my practice. And somewhere along the way, right at the beginning, but it lasted throughout when I was doing litigation, I had slipped into an old habit, which I'll call perfectionism. And I had spent years and years learning about it, trying to overcome it, finding ways to improve my perfectionist tendencies, the habits that I had. And this reverting back to an old habit wasn't because I stopped believing in being courageous and the benefits of continuing to learn and to iterate. It was because I started to try to protect myself and everything that I was working so hard to build. So by the end of this video, you'll understand where that shift happens for you, why so many experienced barristers and lawyers don't see it, and why one of the most important high-performance habits you can build isn't another legal skill, it's courage. And to understand why, we first need to understand what perfection looks like in legal practice. But before I go any further, there's a guide underneath. Please download it before you leave. It's called The Cost of Being the Lawyer Who Can't Get It Wrong. You'll really find it valuable, and it will help you if you can't stay for the rest of this video. So most barristers and lawyers, they don't say they're perfectionists, and they don't call what they're doing as perfectionism. They call it professionalism or thorough preparation or holding high standards, both themselves and others to high standards, or doing the work at an exceptionally high level, not missing anything. And they're right, we need to have high standards. Those things matter. But nobody builds a good legal reputation by cutting corners. Nobody becomes an expert lawyer by doing just the bare minimum. We need these high standards. And at the beginning of your career, your standards, like all of our standards, had one job: build your legal expertise and experience. Then almost without noticing it, it got a second job: protect everything your legal expertise and experience has built. A very different job. Because from that moment on, your standards stop changing your legal expertise. They start changing how you operate inside your practice. I'd spent years working on my perfectionist habits, tendencies, before I ever came to the bar. And I genuinely thought that I'd dealt with it, it wasn't a problem anymore. But then I became a barrister, new environment, new expectations, little experience, limited knowledge, and every piece of advice had my name on it. Every appearance, every conference, every mediation, every client, every outcome, the stakes felt very different. Looking back now, my standards, they hadn't changed. But the job I'd given those standards had. I was now asking, how do I make sure nobody criticises me? How do I make sure nobody judges me negatively? How do I make sure nobody rejects me and doesn't brief me again? I thought I was protecting my reputation and my practice, protecting everything that I was working so hard to build. Looking back, I did take uncomfortable, courageous action coming into law and when I became a barrister. But I hadn't embedded the habit of courage in one particular area, and that was how I approached and delivered my work so that I could consistently operate at a high level across all areas. I was trying to stop anything from happening that might damage what I was building, worried about what people would think of me if it wasn't up to a standard that they expected. Does this sound familiar at all? Because if it does, you're not alone. Because that's exactly what perfectionism does. And I want you to think about perfection like an armour. Nobody puts on an armour because they expect an easy day. They put it on because they feel like they're going to be attacked. And that's what perfectionism does as well. We put that on when we feel like we're going to be attacked. Every extra recheck, every extra hour of prep, every conversation we replay or avoid, every mistake that we make, we beat ourselves up over it. Every time we try to make our work impossible to criticise, we're adding another layer of that armour on. We're carrying it around. But the problem isn't the armour. The problem is that it becomes so heavy. It's like a 20-ton weight, and it changes how we move through our day, our week, our practice, our life. It doesn't stop us from becoming a technically excellent lawyer, but it does change how we operate. And that's where we're going to go next. So what does that second job we attach to our standards do? Well, it changes the questions that we start asking ourselves and the questions that we ask ourselves to determine how we operate. I want you to think about the last week or two. How many conversations did you delay because you were trying to find the perfect words or create the perfect outcome? How many emails did you rewrite? How many times did you recheck something that was already good enough? How many decisions did you replay afterwards? Because none of these has anything to do with your legal expertise. They're trying to protect you from what might happen if somebody criticises you or judges you or your work, what you deliver. And it can be very uncomfortable. But it's a very different purpose when we're thinking in terms of how we're operating. And that's where perfectionism becomes very expensive for us individually in practice. Not because you become less of a lawyer, it doesn't have any impact on that, because it changes the parts of legal practice where legal expertise alone can't solve the problems that you're facing. Leading people, having those difficult conversations, backing your judgment and decisions, becoming more efficient, learning from your mistakes, resolving conflict at mediation beyond legal arguments. That's where the real cost is. Not because you don't know what to do when you're running matters, you do. Because you're trying to work out how to do it without giving room for anybody to criticise or judge you or what you do. And you know what? That's impossible. Because legal practice, it doesn't work like that. Perfection is expected in law. And it's often expected internally by many barristers and lawyers. You can prepare exceptionally well and a judge can still disagree with you. You can give the best advice out and a client can still push back and reject it. You can appear and represent your clients in a hearing or in mediation, and the parties in a mediation still don't settle, or you don't get the outcome that you want in a hearing. You can do everything a competent, experienced barrister or lawyer should do, and something still doesn't go to plan. It still goes wrong. Not because you're incompetent, because you're dealing with yourself and you're dealing with people. And people aren't always reasonable. They can be combative when they disagree. People misunderstand. They've got their own biases. People criticise. They judge and blame. That's practice. So the question isn't, how do I stop these things happening? Because you can't. The question is, how do I operate when they do? And that can change a lot of things for you, like it did for me. Because when you realise barristers and lawyers already know how to deal with legal uncertainty. We know how to run matters in mediations and litigation. It's uncertain. Every day is uncertain. But the uncertainty that perfectionism is trying to eliminate, it becomes much more personal. What, will they think that I'm not good enough? What if I lose credibility? What if they don't brief me again? What if this damages everything that I've built and worked so hard to achieve? The problem is you cannot eliminate or control any of those things. They're out of your control. And that change in perspective is what's needed. We need to stop asking, how do I stop people criticising or judging or blaming me? And start asking, what standard do I want to be known for? And I want you to think about this differently for just a minute. Scientists, they don't judge themselves by whether every experiment they undertake, does it work? If it doesn't work, they ask, well, they run the experiment, then they ask, well, what happened? What did I learn? What will I change? Then they run the next experiment. But lawyers and barristers, they often do the opposite. We use one outcome as evidence, as a definition of who we are. High performers, they use every outcome as data to improve how they operate. That's where implementing courage as a habit is so important. Not because it removes uncertainty or the way other people may judge us or criticise us. It won't change that. It changes the questions. Because perfectionism asks, how do I make sure nobody criticises, judges or rejects me? Courage asks, what's my best? What can I learn? How can I improve? What's the next iteration? What's the next best action that I need to take? So one, perfectionism, trying to protect you and what others may think of you. The other is improving you and how you operate. So that's perfectionism. So we've got that on one hand. So what does high performance look like? Because it's not about lowering your standards. If anything, it's raising them. Just not raising them to the standard of perfection, because really perfection isn't a standard. It doesn't exist. It's raising the standards of how we all operate. And that's a big difference. One standard is, I have to get this right, I can't make a mistake. The other says, I'm committed to continually improving how I operate. That's the barrister or lawyer I want to be known as. They're two completely different standards. And I want you to think about a barrister or a lawyer that you really trust. You've over time learned to trust. Why do you trust them? Was it because they've never made a mistake? Well, no, if they're human, they're going to make mistakes. It's just a part of being human. Was it because nobody ever criticised them? No. They would have been criticised. Was it because they always had all of the right answers? No. You trusted them because you knew how they'd operate when things became really difficult. They already had their standards in place. That's the difference. And that's courage, is to identify those standards and then take the action to be able to align you with the standards that you want to operate by. The habit of operating according to your standards, even when you get criticised, judged, rejected, your standards are there and you can still reach your standards. That is a real possibility. And that's the difference between high performers and perfectionists. Perfectionists, they're trying to protect themselves and their reputations, but it holds them back, keeps them stuck. But courage gives you the power to do what's uncomfortable, when it's uncertain, when there's risk, because you're willing to do your best every time and to learn and iterate and improve in the process. So perfectionism, focused externally. What do people think? What are their opinions? Will they criticise me? The other is courage is focused internally. Am I going to continually improve? Not comparing ourselves to others, but how am I going to improve and learn and iterate so that I do better every single day? So perfectionism, that's setting us up so that we're trying to look and deliver perfectly so we're untouchable. And the other, high performance, is about daily doing better, becoming better. And that's why courage is a high performance habit, because we need courage to have standards that aren't based on perfectionism, but on standards that we define and want to be known for. And our high performance habits, which include courage, they don't remove uncertainty, because it accepts there are parts of legal practice, lots of parts that we are never going to get control, no matter how good of a lawyer or barrister we are. And as far as the legal uncertainty is concerned, we're trained for that. But it's a human uncertainty, the criticism, the disagreement, the rejection, the difficult conversations, the mistakes, the feedback, the client who walks, the solicitor who doesn't brief you again and doesn't say anything, the moments where you feel in a situation that your reputation is exposed. And courage doesn't wait for those moments to disappear. It actually expects them. And it keeps operating according to your defined standards anyway. And that's where high performance lives. Not becoming or trying to become perfect and untouchable, but becoming the barrister and lawyer people trust because of how you operate. Because your reputation isn't built by never making a mistake. We're humans, we all make mistakes. It's built by how you respond, what happens after you make the mistake. And I think that's the barrister or lawyer most of us really want to be known for. Not as a perfectionist, but as a high performer who responds to things that go wrong daily. How are we going to respond when we're faced with those challenges? So let me leave you with this. Perfectionism, it's not a standard, not even a high standard. It's an impossible expectation. Externally, what others expect of us, maybe culturally, what our culture expects. It also can be internal, what we expect of ourselves. But no barrister, no senior lawyer will ever become untouchable or perfect. We're humans. So don't rely on perfect as a standard. Define your standards. Give them the right job, not focused on protecting you and what you built so hard to protect. But looking at how can I continually improve? How can I get better tomorrow than what I was today in the way that I operate? Helping you become the barrister or lawyer people trust because of how you practice law, 50% of your job in practice, and the other 50%, how you do all of those other things in practice that require skills as well, skills to be able to do them at a high level. So if today's conversation made you recognise yourself, you could see yourself in parts of this, don't leave it there. The next question is whether perfectionism, is it costing you? The question is, where is it costing you? That's why I created the cost of being the lawyer who can't get it wrong. It walks you through the 3 signs that the same standards which help build your legal reputation now are likely changing how you operate under pressure. So not so that you lower your standards, so that you can recognise when they've taken on that second job. Because once you see it, you then get to choose and define your standards, but it takes courage to do that. One that helps you become a barrister or senior lawyer people trust because of how you operate. That's your end goal. If you'd like a copy, the link is below.